Ahsoka, Balance of Truth. Book 1, Chapter 3. Drifting in Malakor's low orbit, Ahsoka had not even remembered falling asleep as she opened her eyes slowly in response to the constant beep and chime from the chip's control board. Her body was unresponsive in her mind's efforts to shake the sleep loose from her extremities. They, however, would not be swayed from their present inactivity. Refusing to irritate their restful state further, she laid her head back on the seat's headrest and contemplated the events that had led her to this point. How a suggestion from the Jedi Temple on Lothal had irrevocably changed the paths of everyone involved. In hindsight, she understood the guidance that Ezra had received and imparted to the three of them. The three of us, she said to herself, remembering that Rex had also offered to assist. How would that have played out? The question formed itself and filled the air before Ahsoka could stow it under her breath. She knew she did the right thing by removing Ezra from the viciousness of Vader's wrath, but Rex. She knew she could not have done that to him, and he'd be dead. The thought took form before she could blink an eye. Yes, he'd be dead, she said in her response, remembering the look in his eye as they parted ways via hollow in the Phantom. She owed it to him as well to make her way back. Her thoughts shifted in and out of those moments as the images of Rex, Kanan, and Ezra flashed in her mind. Her thoughts returned then to Ezra's question and Master Yoda's subsequent answer, and only screwed her face into a contorted confusion. Had the aged master not understood the question itself, or did they miss a vital opportunity that he had foreseen? The Sith will not be destroyed if Sidious yet lives. The thought roused her senses, feeling finding its way back into her fingers and toes. Surely, Master, you know this, Ahsoka said aloud, feeling the truth of the statement as assuredly as she believed it. Ahsoka, fresh with a renewed sense of comprehension, began again to swaddle her mind and thoughts with Ezra's ramblings. The young man had seemed almost deranged after she had regained her consciousness, with only tiny shreds of understanding, doing their best to grasp her content. He was in a hurry, they both were, to escape encroaching doom from the man who always was one step ahead of any effort to unseat him. She pinched her eyes in thought as she rubbed at her forehead with vigor, an attempt to rekindle Master Yoda's wisdom into an understandable framework concerning what she knew to be true. Again, she came up short of comprehending the initial guidance. Knowing her earlier assertion was correct, she was missing something. You've missed a lot, Ezra had said upon her inspection of him. The young man, she paused in thought. He's a young man, she said to the foggy canopy of the shuttle's cockpit before her. She traced her memory back to that conversation, noting his stature, facial features, and hair. Everything about the boy she had known had changed into the young man who had saved her. The look in his eyes, however, had not. They continued to bear the weight of his past, but seemed weary to Ahsoka as she paused in the present on the image her memory had forged. Those eyes had seen additional grief, despair, and heartache. They reflected the loss of his master. I have missed a lot, Ezra, I have, Ahsoka said aloud again, filling the cockpit with her morbid tone, and renewing the sadness she had thought she was beyond. She bowed her head as her lips mouthed the words she had tried consoling him with as he watched his own master die for the second time, knowing he was helpless to stop it only at her behest. You can't save your own master, and I can't save mine. She could not stop the waves of sorrow from casting their nets about her soul. Within minutes she had seen that sorrow manifest through the truth of Anakin's fate and death of Kanan Jarrus. Her heart cried out for some modicum of relief from the constant state of anguish, pain, and mourning her life had become. A wash of guilt followed closely behind, an ode to those she knew who suffered similarly as she selfishly tried to consume the whole of the grief for herself. There seemed to be no winning in this war of emotions, only stalemates and misdirection. She would need time to figure that strategy out to remove herself from its distraction. Time, she actively thought, as her tear-filled gaze drifted from the dust-covered canopy to the ship's chronometer. Time? she said aloud, finding reason to question her sanity again as its readings could not be correct. She tapped the control panel mounted device several times, hoping it was faulty. However, she watched with fruitlessly diminishing hope and reason as the instrument continued to tick the seconds away. 2 years? She shouted at the controls, thrumming a fist upon its ambivalent features. She let the enormity of the realization consume her. Ezra had mentioned that she had missed a lot, but could not have realized he had meant it literally. That's not possible, she stammered, her mind yet again lost to what was staring her right in the face. Diagnostic. The practical side of her mind filled in the haze with some form of reason, assuming the instrument was faulty. She checked her coordinates in relation to the planet, deciding that a full diagnostic sweep would be safer in high orbit, and punched a new set of coordinates 40,000 kilometers away from Malakor's surface. Engaging the ion engine bank again, she felt the ship shudder in defiance, but gradually smoothed its protest into surrender as the makeshift craft responded to her command. High orbit, high orbit established, and she commenced with the diagnostics, knowing it would be a half hour before they conveyed any information necessary to plan her next course of action. In the meantime, she was afforded some time to reflect, to unmask her emotions and deal with them head on, to unlearn what she had learned, and to close her eyes to meditate. Where had Ezra gone? To fulfill his destiny, her mind answered. You told him as much, she reminded herself. Ezra just did things and then thought about it later. While comprehending the consequences, he did not take the time to foresee them initially, whereby learning the lesson inherent in all actions and choices. It was his weakest trait, but he seemed to do quite well by it, even though it usually led to hasty decisions and sometimes disastrous outcomes. The parallels to Anakin were almost uncanny. Could she have returned to Lothal with him? Yes, was her immediate response, but with many appendices and consequences that would have irrevocably diverted his fate and destiny. Her presence would only provide him with the crutch to absolve himself of the responsibility of resolving his destiny and the consequences of his actions. She could not follow him, as she could not walk the same path as Anakin. Ahsoka no longer needed to follow the path of inquiry, as her third entry brought itself to resolution. Had they remained together, Sidious would undoubtedly have achieved his intended goal. By diverting his efforts, they could both enact their separate escapes. Sidious, Palpatine. Again, the man inserted himself into her thoughts and meditations. From his meddling in Jedi affairs to corrupting seeds sown galaxy-wide, the man's agenda was far more comprehensive than anyone could account for or anticipate. Having unrestricted access to that place with no name has a potential of omnipotence, which was his end goal. To perceive what is coming, encourage what you wish to happen, and change what you do not is more power than anyone should ever wield. She was unsure how exactly Ezra had managed to get in himself, and her thought now relied on her faith in him. He would understand, upon exit, the absolute necessity to immediately close, lock, and throw away the key to that portal. She shifted her thoughts then to her exit from the temple. She was not surprised by her ability to use dark side energy. The nature of the Force itself had taught her long ago that she did not own it, and it did not own her. What surprised her was the well of knowledge, vitality, and power it yielded in the short time she employed it. She understood quickly how one could succumb to its whispered promises, never settling on an ultimate price until one is too profoundly entangled to refuse its offer. Ahsoka basked in the thoughts that followed, knowing the light exacts its price. The cost of using it is not unlike that of dark energy. It requires one to relinquish oneself. Precepts adopted by the Jedi and forced into code millennia ago categorized the levels of relinquishment of the self and became more doctrine than practice. She could only shake her head at that level of nepotism. Her exit from the Order was by choice, in defiance of a moral code over what should have been natural. But it was all precisely where it belonged, in the past. She smiled at her astral self as she knew she was a Force user, somewhere in between. I am Ahsoka Tano, Force user of somewhere in between. she said definitively as she forced herself back into her mortal shell. She smiled at the comment as she opened her eyes to the sights and sounds of the shuttle's cockpit once again, at ease with what she had been able to work through. The beeping of the diagnostic panel alerted her to its self-run completion with a stellar all-clear green flash and confirming data scroll. "Thank you," she muttered upon reviewing the results. She knew she would have to put down soon for a reboot and would most certainly have to service the seals and rings before navigating to any hyperspace lanes, but a clean diagnostic was an excellent first step. Her meditations helped her understand a great deal, and she would most certainly return to them once clear of this system. But until then, she needed a viable spaceport to put down. "That would be Vindal," she mentioned after a close review of the Sim star chart. Vindal Station, to be exact. Returning to Malachor not being an option, more out of choice than circumstance, she whirled around to inspect the hyperdrive visually. A palpable tension gripped her as she weighed the consequence of engaging its reactor and ripping the modified shuttle apart at its seams. She entered the projected trajectory toward her destination and rolled her eyes at the estimated 3 days it would take to make the distance with the ion engines engaged. "What I'd give for a sublight bank," she said to herself, that even with the notion that time was something she had in abundance now, she had 2 years of it to catch up on. She knew she was hungry, although water was not a problem, as she eyed several full cisterns, but locating salvageable rations was turning out to be. Restricting food was not new to Ahsoka, and the best way to mitigate the pangs of hunger was to forget that one was hungry. 3 days is a long time to forget I'm hungry, she said, exiting the pilot's seat and rummaging through storage cabinets. Finding nothing, she eyed the dormant astromech again and settled on the water. Her thoughts turned to Vindal, assuming it was still a functioning spaceport and that it was not under Imperial control, as well as what the small world had to offer. What plans could she assemble after retrieving what she needed? Adelon? She answered herself. Make your way to Adelon? At that very moment, the whisper could be heard again, for the third time. "A soul feel to mine da." Ahsoka stopped everything she was doing, felt her inward tension cease, and was as still as possible. Not the words, or fractions thereof, halting her activity. It was the voice. She knew it immediately. Master Yoda? It was a question on every level. Not expecting an answer, the question itself verified her intuition. Without another second wasted, she returned, yet again, to her meditative seat and proverbially dove right in. Master Yoda? She thought, in all senses and in all ways possible. Nothing. Silence. Ahsoka pulled back into her core and reached out to the Force, receiving multiple provocations in return, but all incredibly vague. She could quickly locate ley lines and feel a living force as a net encompasses its quarry. She could see subtle movement in and around the planets in the system and the closer systems of the sector, but could not locate a being or single focal point emanating a coherent direct connection to the Force, either light or dark, in between. It was all around her, but not centered on an individual directly communicating with it or to it. To Ahsoka, it meant that either the voice or whisper was well outside her capacity to reach, or it was no longer mutually connected. "Ahsoka." It came again, spoken but not spoken, directed at her subconscious, of which she was currently in complete control of and operating within. Again, not sensing a particular form from which to locate the source, it was outside her reach. Without guidance, she could not return the call, and would have to try again once in a hyperlane. She took a deep breath and closed off energy to all but her mind for the time it would take to reach once more, straining to push herself past her limits. She could sense more systems falling into the fold this time, her net, which was encouraging, but not to the extent needed. She inhaled deeply to compensate and held the air there momentarily as she exited meditation and sprinted to the Navi computer. It still held the jump coordinates for Vindal, and without hesitation she engaged the hyperdrive. The ship groaned, and for a second she thought she might have Ezra'd herself into an unsalvageable situation. Still, the ship only lurched and shot forward into and directly out of hyperspace in the time it took her to think this was a terrible idea. The large ball of green and blue snapped into view, and to her relief did not get more prominent, as her mind foresaw the ship hurtling straight through the planet and into complete obliteration. Those seals are gonna hate me. The red warning blips of plasma leaks already registering. Coolant level 0. Fuel, final cell about to burn up. Shields, 15%, and dropping fast. Nothing was encouraging through her verbal assessment. Coming in hot was an understatement. If the shields did not yield before she broke atmosphere, she was sure she would be fine, and full thrust ion burst would ensure that. But if the fuel cells ran dry before a landing cycle was established, the ship would be unrecoverable, much less spaceworthy. As foolish as the endeavor seemed in her thoughts, Ahsoka could not contemplate anything other than a complete throttle descent. Stabilizers were not even a consideration as the ship canned into either direction at random. The ship tore through the atmosphere with a deafening crack and thunderous boom, listing port and twisting the cockpit in bursts. Instinctively, knowing her controls would reverse her intention, she forced the throttle deeper into its pit and pushed as hard as she could on the control arm, barrel rolling into a stall out. Inclined acceleration. Pulling back on the arm, cutting power to the ion banks, and engaging both the repulsor lift and maneuvering jets, she flattened out. She came to a controlled descent, with the landing cycle finally entering. Blinking several times to let the last 10 seconds of her life catch up with her heartbeat, she could only imagine what that entrance looked like from the ground. Ahsoka quickly exerted the necessary audible data for clearance to the ground crew at Vindal Station once she found her voice. However, she hesitated to release compromising information to the electronic voice demanding credentials. I had a reactor core breach in transit to Vindal from Trokian. I need to put down for repairs, then I'll be on my way, satiating Ahsoka's fears concerning Imperial occupation. She was in a hurry to land this thing and assess the damage to get what she needed, fix it, and get off this planet in as little time as possible. She wanted to get herself spaceworthy and back into a suitable position to attempt to reach out to Master Yoda again. Doubtful that it was the best of ideas, she switched on the mech droid in the hopes of some assistance with the noted repairs. It bleeped 3 times, spun its head around twice, stopped its photoreceptor on Ahsoka, bleeped once more, and began spinning and banging itself into everything it could bang itself into. I know I'm not your master, little guy, but I need your help, Ahsoka relayed as calmly as possible. The droid immediately stopped moving and beeped twice more. Yes, I can understand you. I am Ahsoka and I need your help, she said, maintaining her calm. She thought about how many more droids she had befriended than actual people as she felt the ship lurch into motionlessness, the landing cycle completed. The ragged port was automated, her permissions directed by a droid in a customs bay. Quickly, the astromech came to rest at her side and followed her as she lowered the boarding ramp and half stumbled down. She immediately turned her attention 180 degrees after planting her feet on the ground, taking in the damage. It was extensive. The ship was smoking, creaking laboriously, and dripping various lubricants and coolants onto the landing pad. She already knew she needed new seals, rings for the plasma housing, and durasteel panels to repair the damage from the escaped plasma, shield generator power couplers, and probably a kilometer of wire to replace everything that's fried. Attaining the parts was not the problem. The time it would take to fix what needed fixing was adding up quickly. Time she was not sure she had, even with the droid's assistance, in stark contrast to just a few minutes ago when she thought she had more than enough.